Testing. Thanks everyone for coming today. My name is Ariane Lloyd-Pitty. I am Ed and Laurel's granddaughter, and I'm emceeing today, which is something I didn't actually quite realise until we got there. So just to start us off, first of all I'd like to hand over to Uncle Bunja Smith, who has kindly agreed to provide the welcome to country today. Uncle Bunja is a Walbunja man from the Greater Yuin Nation and is also chair of the Byamanga National Park Aboriginal Board of Management. Thank you, Bunja.
Thank you. I don't know if I deserve that, but thank you. Look, thank you so much for inviting me along today. I'm really excited. I'm really excited and looking forward to reading this. I noticed one of the chapters is the man from Nottingham, and I went straight there because when I visited England, we went to Nottingham Forest, which is allegedly the home of Robin Hood, and I actually shot an arrow. They had a little tourist thing there, and I think it cost me £6 and I got 4 arrows. So I can say I shot an arrow in Nottingham Forest. But no, look, a lot of people don't understand why we do a welcome to country, but it's an ancient Aboriginal practice. If you know your tribes, we identify in this area as either Walbunja or Brinja Yuin, and next to us in the Canberra area we have the Ngunnawal people. Now we would visit, we would go up there, particularly for the bogong moth when it was around. It was a good food source. But because that's their country, we would have to get to the border and we would wait to be invited in. So you had to be welcomed to country. So it was an ancient Aboriginal tradition. And and that they really would, a bit like border force, check you out. What's your clan? What's your skin group? Why are you here? And what's your totem? So they go through a whole an array of things, and so it's a traditional Aboriginal practice. But today we do welcome to country more out of a spirit of reconciliation. So that's where it's come from, that's its tradition, and that's why we do it today. And we see it more and more often at football games and places like this, and that's what it's about. It's about respecting the traditional owners of the land, and we do that by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and paying our respects to elders and tribespeople, past, present and emerging. But because it's done in a spirit of reconciliation, I also recognise your elders and your tribespeople, past, present and emerging. And we have an opportunity for us here in Australia at the moment with a referendum coming up. And when I've been doing my Welcome to Countries as of late, I've been encouraging people. I think it's important to have a good think about that, and enshrining Aboriginal people in the Constitution, I think is a right thing to do, and I want to encourage us all to vote yes. And I thank you for that. So Walawani Numalaga Indigada, Maigani, Wabanga Banja, Gurad, Maruya, Wallo. I welcome us all here today from the many lands where we gather from, and we pay our respects to the traditional owners of this land. And we also ask for a blessing upon this book. May it touch the hearts of the people that read it. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thank you, Uncle Bunja. So just in the interest of COVID safety, we've got some hand sanitizer, so please remember to social distance and maybe grab some hand sanitizer before we have afternoon tea.
We've all been cuddling.
Yes, very naughty. And also just remind everyone, if you haven't already turned your phone on to silent, now is probably a really good time because you don't want to be that embarrassing person. So Bishop George Browning and his wife Margaret will be launching the book for us today. Bishop George was the Anglican bishop for the Canberra and Goulburn Diocese from 1993 until his retirement in 2008. During those years, Bishop George, in partnership with Archbishop Francis Carroll from the Canberra and Goulburn Catholic Archdiocese, shared the role of bishop protectors for the ecumenical community of the Little Followers of St. Francis. Founded by Edwin and Laurel at the Elm Grove Sanctuary, Gubbarragandra, near Tumut. A very warm bond formed between the Franciscan members of the community and the directors of the charity, the Elm Grove Sanctuary Trust. Both George and Francis offered wonderful support and guidance for the work of the community, and their encouragement and assistance was always greatly valued. Bishop George's commitment to strong values of Indigenous justice and land rights, responsible climate action, closely aligned with Edwin and Laurel's Franciscan ethos. Bishop George's book, Sabbath and the Common Good, argues that the care of creation is a non-negotiable responsibility for a person of faith, and this has always been the firm vision for Elm Grove Sanctuary. Bishop George is the president of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network. He has been a frequent visitor to Palestine and has hosted Palestinian leaders in Australia. He is an advocate for Palestinians against the illegal settlement of Palestinian territories. Margaret Browning came with her husband to Elm Grove several times. Their friendship and ongoing support has remained strong, and this is much appreciated. Edwin and Laurel greatly appreciate that they have generously agreed to launch their book, so I'll now hand over to Bishop George and Margaret.
Thank you, Ariane. And firstly, happy birthday to Ed. Ed and Laurel, thank you for giving me the honour of saying a few words about your life story and the telling of it through this book. Your lives have been a rich blessing to so many, and the way in which you've now put it down in writing draws us into the greater mystery of the way in which God works with his people and creation. There could be no better example of what living in complete trust and dependence on God means than the wonderful story unfolded in this book. Your faith and reliance on God showing you the way humbles me. It's not been a blind faith. The questions, the patience, the listening, the waiting, the obedience, what a shared journey of spiritual growth you have both led. The way forward at every turn was only taken if it was for the greater good or the betterment of humankind. How many of us can do what you have done, moving beyond the rational mindset and acting on mystical experiences? No ordinary journey, but one that is extraordinary. You have helped us understand the immensity of God's love and what obedience means. I'm awestruck by the wonderful God connection and leading you both have been receptive to in your journey. I'm so grateful for your efforts in putting down on paper the intimate and vulnerable life you have led, which keeps enticing us to want to explore the next step with you. We moved to Canberra in 1993 when the Elm Grove Sanctuary was into its 10th year. We were part of many official celebratory occasions, but over the years we were the recipients of Ed and Laurel's ministry too. The warm hospitality, the prayerful liturgical routine, the sacred space were a wonderful balm to our souls. So from a personal point of view, the sanctuary was just that, a sanctuary of holy space, and God's peace and grace abounded there. This book speaks of a couple daring to step outside their comfort zone, daring to trust, sharing in an unexpected vision, and journeying together as the vision evolved and came to fruition. What is outstanding to me is the patient waiting, the more patient waiting, and the steadfast prayer and listening that undergirded this waiting. The growth through the odd problem or setback draws us even further into wanting to turn the next page to discover how God's revelation works out in your discernment and courageous action. You have been living with an ongoing miracle in the way in which you trusted God's provision. Many of us would have balked. Thank you for your selfless service and being God's instruments in offering unity and hope. As Sister Maureen Hunnison said, if you had not said yes to God's leading, there would have been no Elm Grove. It's all very well to have these experiences and adventures, but conveying all this in writing together is a wonderful gift to us all. Thank you for recording it in the same way you have lived, open to God's leading and sharing it together with us all. We are greatly blessed by this special gift. I will leave others to make comments or quotes from the book, but can I encourage you, it's an inspiring and enriching book and a must read. Congratulations.
Well, you've received the good wine, now you'll get the lesser wine, I'm afraid. I also would like to acknowledge the First Nations people and to rejoice to be in their company. Thank you for the welcome, and it's been and hope that we will share a common path into the future. Earlier this year, Margaret and I visited our youngest son, and while we were with him, he said, "Listen, Dad, don't give me again this business. We were just an ordinary family." "You were not an ordinary family." I said, "Well, I think we were a very ordinary family." He said, No, you weren't. And we didn't get an ordinary upbringing as children. I thought, oh, I'm terribly sorry. And he said, no, well, first of all, we never heard a voice raised in the house. So how do you expect us to deal with conflict now we're adults? And he said, secondly, there was an assumption in the house that God is here. Now that is not ordinary. Most houses are not like that. And thirdly, anybody was welcome to come in our door. It was never locked, and I could come home and already there was somebody I'd never seen before sitting down for lunch. This was not ordinary. We did not live in an ordinary family. I begin that way because I have a lot of sympathy for Ed and Laurel's children and grandchildren, because what I have said applies to them in a much bigger way. The way these two guys have lived is not ordinary. In fact, who wrote the book, They're a Weird Mob? O'Grady. Well, they are a weird mob, and in the very best possible sense of the word. I'm impressed in the people present here that, unlike an ordinary Anglican gathering, there are actually people here under 30. And I'm impressed. But I'm impressed that there are young people here who hopefully will read this book and will learn about a path less travelled. Now, when you think about God, if you do, I wonder what you think. And what does God do basically most of God's time when God is not asleep or worrying about things? I would like to suggest to you that the primary thing that God does is create space. This is the biblical story. God creates space and freedom for all things living to enjoy the place that is provided. And in Ed and Laurel's lives, they have in an extraordinary way created space. Space for people whose religious experience is different to their own. Space for Archbishop Francis Carroll and myself to come into their lives from two really different Christian traditions. Space for people who are searching for holy ground in the Australian environment. I'm sure some of you went to Elm Grove. Margaret and I were there often. And in Elm Grove, the community was not boss over the environment. I wouldn't say the environment was boss over them, but they settled in together. And we human beings are called actually to settle into the environment that God has made. And I don't know of any couple who have done that better than Ed and Laurel. And to go to Elm Grove was such a joy. To see the trees, the stream that went down below, and so on, was great. But also, Ed and Laurel have, more than most, have settled into the tradition and country which has been occupied by human beings for 60,000 years. And not many Australians have been able yet to do that. And the extraordinary thing is that we later comers think that we have most to offer to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, such arrogance. The reality is that it is the reverse. We have more to receive from them. And so Ed and Laurel, in their living, have demonstrated this unique way of perhaps anticipating voice, of being open to hearing voices which need to be heard, but until recently have remained largely silent in the Australian community. And I might add, it's not to do with Elm Grove, but since they have lived down on the coast, you would be aware that one of the most dramatic moments of their life was when they were hounded in the courts for having stood up for Indigenous people around Bega. It was quite a dreadful period in their lives. I was one of the people who was called or invited to stand with them. And I also received abuse, but nothing like the abuse that they received. And how incredible it is that in a country like ours, you can still be abused for having stood with Australia's First Nations people. So I think in human life there are various sort of markers that tell us who we are. One marker is the people whose company we're prepared to share. And Ed and Laurel are prepared to share everybody's company. And so if you went to Elm Grove on any particular occasion, goodness knows who you'd meet there. Some of you strange people are here today that I've met at Elm Grove years and years and years ago. And one of the vocations of life is actually, as you know, without sounding too pious, is actually to see God in everybody that you meet. And Laurel and Ed, in a remarkable way, have been able to exemplify that. Quite how they've been able to do that so graciously all these years, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think I've been able to, but they have. So one of the markers of life is the company we keep. The second marker of life is the places that we call sacred. And sacredness has to do with that which is special, that which is where you actually have met a reality beyond yourself. I have a number of sacred places in my life, both in the UK and here in Australia, places where an encounter with God has been very real to me. Sometimes it's been in church, but funnily enough, but by no means always. And often the meeting is with the strangest of people. And Margaret and I, like Laurel and Ed, have been blessed in the company that we've kept And more often than not, the sacred place has had to do with a refugee, or a displaced person, or a disabled person, or somebody who is on the brink of a terrible disaster. And the last point I'd make, which is probably the main one that runs through this book, is the other marker is the voices that we are open to hearing. And sometimes I think most Australians are only open to hearing the voice of Rupert Murdoch and his company, or Fox News or something. And the voices that we're open to hearing actually transform our lives, whether we know it or not. And so we have to be careful about the voices that we're prepared to actually to listen to. And Ed and Laurel, in a remarkable testimony in this book, have been open to the voice of God in a way that very few of us, I think, would actually be able to witness to. That's not because they are more holy than us or anything. It is that they have had this extraordinary capacity to listen beyond the realms of ordinary conversation. There are a few moments in my life when I have also had that experience of hearing the voice of God clearly. For me, the most dramatic way was when I actually went through a crisis in my life in 1999. And where did Margaret and I go in the midst of that crisis for a safe place? We went to Elm Grove. It was for us the safest place to go. And it was, for Margaret and myself, a remarkable time, and it cements a relationship and a connection which obviously brings us to this day. So, Ed and Laurel and your family, thank you very much for being who you are, for being able to reach out in an extraordinary way, a very humble way, to the life in which we live, and to be icons of the future for which we hope. I've got grandchildren about the age of some people in the back here, and sometimes I'm terrified about the future that you guys are inheriting. Quite terrified about it, both from an environmental point of view and also from a human point of view, of whether humanity on the face of this planet is actually going to be able to live harmoniously with one another, or whether we won't. And I don't know at this stage the answer to the question. But if we do, then I think the way in which we do is to follow the path which Ed and Laurel have shown us in the Little Followers of St. Francis. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to launch the book, The Elm Grove Story, A Mystical Journey.
Thank you very much, Margaret and Bishop George. Now, Edwin is going to provide a short reading.
First of all, thank you for those glowing words. I'm now going to do through this little reading to introduce you to the idiot. At times.
You need the microphone. Move the microphone.
Do you want to sit down?
No, I don't mind standing there. I'm not that feeble, you know. Well, not feeble. Anyway, this chapter 21, is called My Bungee Jump Sans Rope. Following our wonderful time of celebration at the Port Clare Monastery at Stroud to honour St Clare's life, we headed back home.
Just going to get you a bit closer to the microphone.
I could move. Following our wonderful time of celebration at the Port Clare Monastery at Stroud to honour St Clare's life, we headed back home, and it was a freezing night when we arrived. The temperature was -3 degrees centigrade and falling, so the urgency to get our fire going was paramount. As soon as I lit the main fire, billowing clouds of smoke assailed me. This sent us both scurrying to open doors and windows in an already freezing house before rushing outside to check the chimney flue. Upon inspection, I could see that it was bent over inwards under the protective cap, preventing the smoke from exiting. I couldn't imagine how this had happened in our absence. I could only surmise that it was our old friend Percy Possum, the delinquent furry rascal, had been trying to break into our house in our absence. I decided that I would need to go up on the roof to unlock it. Laurel, the wise woman that she is, firmly told me, "Don't be so stupid, as the roof is covered with ice and you'll slip off." I assured her that I would be okay. I explained that I would put on my thick welly boots and their deep treads, and I would walk only on the roofing screws. In hindsight, one must ask how come this idiot was ever allowed out. I fetched the ladder up and I went. Amidst Laurel's admonishments, standing up so high, I scanned the valley, noticing how beautiful everything looked. The star-filled sky and the exceptionally bright moon made the frosty landscape glisten magically. It brought to mind the wonder and majesty of the universe and how small we all are in comparison. Inching my way slowly along the sloping veranda roof while taking exceptional care to keep to the roofing screws, I hadn't gone far before disaster struck. My feet slipped away from beneath. I fell flat onto the sloping roof and slid inexorably to the edge of my known universe. In that moment, time seemed to freeze, and it seemed as though I was sliding down the Franz Josef Glacier, as glinting, sparkling ice particles rushed past my face. In fact, I had only slid about 2 meters before I disappeared over the edge to crash onto the concrete ramp 6.5 meters below. Time seemed to be almost to stand still at that moment. Laurel was at my side in an instant, and she found me in a crumpled heap, not moving. Her despairing cry brought me to consciousness, and I must have groaned or mumbled something as I became aware of her voice commanding very firmly, "Do not move." With these instructions, she said that she would get a blanket and ring for the ambulance before again instructing me to remain totally still. She quickly returned with the blanket and disappeared back up the steps to telephone for help. Meanwhile, I was becoming more aware of the difficult situation that I was in. I was lying on a very cold and frosty ramped concrete pathway, and I knew that it would take the ambulance 30 minutes to come from town, and I would freeze to death. I decided to test out my bits and pieces to make sure that everything was still in working order. Firstly, I gingerly tried to move my legs. They were okay. So I checked my arms, and they seemed fine. I thought to myself that it would be such a great shame to have survived the fall only to die from hypothermia. And I tried moving my body slightly to see if I could drag it a little way along the ramp. I found that I could. Still in great shock and due to the freezing conditions, I didn't feel too much pain. I dragged myself down the ramp until I reached the door of the chapel. I had dragged myself about 4 meters, and I pushed open the door and pulled myself over the step. When Laurel came back outside to find me missing, she was frantic. I heard her calling out my name, and upon finding me in the chapel, her anxiety brought forth some furious words of reprimand. I remember words such as idiot, fool, Stupid. No sense at all. Possible quadriplegic. As they hit the powerful fan. The only defence I could plead was that I hadn't wanted to freeze to death and that I'd checked out all my bits and pieces and so on. Laurel was able to light the gas fire in the chapel, which was a great relief. I knew that she was very concerned with my condition. Meanwhile, our close neighbours Ken and Julia had arrived as Laurel had telephoned them to ask to ring for an ambulance to save her being held up by a lengthy call, realising the urgency to attend to me. She was kind. At that point, Laurel had believed I was still lying out on the cold concrete ramp. Ken and Julia, members of the Friends of Elm Grove group, came directly after calling the ambulance. They were very concerned on hearing the news, and as I lay on the floor with 3 pairs of accusatory eyes staring down at me, I remember thinking how nice it was to have 3 kind, loving people to care for me. Nevertheless, the despairing looks in their eyes, accompanied by much head shaking, while Laurel recounted the whole sorry tale of my misdemeanours interwoven with her prior warnings and admonishments, did cause me to reflect a little on my stupidity. As I peered out from under a layer of blankets, I remember feeling relieved by the arrival of the paramedics, as I wished to escape the concerned gazes of those who clearly loved me. Upon checking the length of my fall, the paramedics expressed their incredulity that I had survived. I was duly delivered to the emergency department of Tumut Hospital. I previously always found the nursing staff there to be very efficient and caring, but on this occasion I found myself being subjected to much tut-tut-tutting as they generously offered advice as to why one doesn't wander around on ice-covered roofs in the middle of the night. Later, when I decided to get up and go down the corridor to rid my brain of reliving the slide off the roof, I was discovered by the night nurse. I was read the Riot Act and admonished for moving around before I had been x-rayed, as she firmly explained the possible consequences of potential damage that might be found. I was carefully placed back in my bed with more stern warnings and many reprimands, accompanied by the list of what I was allowed to do and what I was not. Clearly, my shocked brain had totally failed to understand just how serious the situation was. And for the continuance of that, please buy the book and you can read the rest of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brendan. We'll now hear from Laurel, who will say a few words.
Firstly, I'd really sincerely like to thank George and Margaret for their kind words. They've been marvellous support to us over the years, and very cherished, the pair of you. I thought, seeing a lot of people don't know what the book's about or anything, but we've had quite a few people who have read the book, and from overseas, who all over the place, and some atheists who wanted to share their impression of the book. And I had a letter from a writer in Canberra who calls himself a rusted-on atheist. And I thought I'd share that with you. And he's included a poem, and I thought it might give you an insight. Dear Laurel, firstly, let me thank you and Ed again for the wonderfully generous gift of your Elm Grove Odyssey. As a writer, I'm ashamed to say that I've never been much of a personal correspondent. However, since I have experienced a curiously persistent need to write to you a personal letter, Laurel, here it is. As you know, I'm a long-lapsed agnostic, by which I mean a would-be atheist. If not for the underlying logic of knowing that no human being can say with absolute certainty that there isn't a God, or whatever manifestation, therefore making atheism an unsustainable proposition. And so, on a balance of probabilities, I love that phrase, I live with the belief that we are a cosmically chemical fluke whose existence is so outrageously against the odds to defy imagination. That said, I'm also irretrievably seduced by your God behind the God we don't believe in, and since early childhood have always been attracted by the notion of an infinite mystery. I try to capture this sense of unreachability with some of my poems, one of which appears in my collection, The Shapes of Light. And the poem is called The Taste of Rainbows. For what becomes of innocence worn down and lost in life? The happy doubt of painful youth, the calm of tempered strife, the coziness of winter dark, the fey unravelled thing, the creative expectation unanswered questions bring. The universe is held aloft, its mysteries lay unfurled, but the night stars still outnumber all the sand grains of the world. And in the deepest mystery, beyond microscopic reach, rests the rainbow taste of wisdom no scientist can reach. And that's the way it should be, untouchable and still, with nothing but the shadow of a light upon the hill. With this poem, I seem to be suggesting that we should be, perhaps not content, but reconciled by the knowledge that something greater than ourselves exists beyond the reach of human understanding. Does that make me a believer? I guess the purpose of this letter is to express my heartfelt gratitude for the loving friendship you and Ed have provided over the years. I may not understand your sense of increased awareness, Laurel, or the mystical journey that you and Ed have undertaken, but please know that I respect, admire and love you both and always will. Ian. And while I've got the mic here, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. There's so many wonderful faces I haven't seen for so many years here. There's new faces, people I haven't met before, and just to say thank you so much. And also, while I get the opportunity, I'd like to say happy birthday to Trish too, whose birthday it is today.
I'll now invite Director Sean Burke to come up and say a few words about the ongoing work of the Elm Grove Sanctuary Trust.
Thank you, Ariane, and thank you for the welcome, Bunja, Uncle. And I'd like to firstly acknowledge that we're gathered here on Walbunja, Brinja, Yuin country, and pay honour to the elders, including Uncle Bunja, past, present and emerging. I first met Laurel and Ed in about 2001 when they moved down to Bermagui, and I was attracted by the shared interest in the environment, social justice and also spirituality. After a few years of working with the Elm Grove Sanctuary Trust Board, I was then invited to become a director, and it's been a great honour for me to be a director of the Trust for quite a number of years, and I thank you for that. Elm Grove Sanctuary Trust seeks to improve the quality of life for all people, free from discrimination due to race, religion, creed or social background. Working in areas of support through education and the upholding of human rights, social justice and equality of opportunity, we provide support to disadvantaged individuals and programs, especially focusing on children and youth. The Elm Grove Sanctuary Trust has a program to provide annual encouragement grants to people needing support. If you can help with donations or know a deserving person who could benefit from this program, please get in touch with us. There are flyers on the front table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. So now, the moment we've all been waiting for, there's some birthday cake. So we've got some birthday cake to celebrate Ed's birthday, and I am assuring everyone there is plenty of cake to go around. So please, everyone, stay and have a piece of cake. And thank you again for all coming. Thank you.